G'day, welcome to Australia Asks. Today we're here with Dr Gordon Reid. We would like to acknowledge that we live, work and play in Darkajung country, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So, g'day Gordon. Firstly, welcome. We're here at Umino Surf Club. I hear this is something important to you and something in your past. So why are we here today?
Yeah, well, look, thanks firstly for having me on today, Adam. This is a great initiative, and it's really good that we can get out there and talk about the issues that matter to us here locally on the Central Coast. You're absolutely right. The Umino Beach Surf Club has a strong presence and a strong part of my history, particularly with my family, with my father, who was a member of the Umino Beach Surf Club, and this is my home. Umino was where I was born, where I was raised. I still have family that live here on the peninsula. I spoke very heavily about this area and this part of the world in my maiden speech to Parliament. In particular, the view that you see behind us right now with Lion Island. This is one of the most beautiful places on earth for people to live, people to work, for people to play, as you've rightly said. And it's also a great place where community can gather, and it has that great sense of community, and I'm really proud to associate myself with the peninsula, and I'll always be a peninsula boy.
So you've said you were born and bred here, so born in Gosford Hospital, I'm guessing?
Yep, so I was born over in Gosford, raised here in Umino, started off at school just over there at Umino Beach Public School. My grandparents are still here on the Central Coast. My nan, Auntie Robin Reid, some of your viewers may know. I know that you know Adam, a very famous local Aboriginal elder. Auntie Robin's been on the peninsula now for quite some time. My grandfather, Ronald Reid, who passed during the COVID pandemic. Miss him every day, but also was local. And my mum's mum, Elaine Rowan, still lives on Ocean Beach Road. So my family's all still very local. We then moved over to the other side of the Central Coast, and I attended Central Coast Grammar School, and I live over towards the Terrigal side of the electorate now.
Yep.
And then went on to do my tertiary studies at the University of Newcastle, completing my medical degree there, and I was fortunate enough and had the privilege to do my final medical school placements in Gosford and Wyong Hospital, and then completed my internship, residency and senior residency in those hospitals. And it's this place, the Central Coast, no matter where I am in it, it's always going to be home.
Yeah, I get that too.
Yeah.
It's definitely the place you always want to come back to.
Absolutely. When you cross the Hawkesbury River Bridge, driving back from Canberra, just this overwhelming sense of relief. There's nothing quite like it.
Yeah, it is an amazing feeling. I love it. So you were talking about mum and dad? Yep. So what did mum do?
So there's a bit in that. So mum's been a small business owner for quite some time. And dad is also a small business owner now, but he's previously been a paramedic for the New South Wales Ambulance Service, and then prior to that was actually a nurse in the area of palliative care and aged care. So we've always had that link to healthcare. My auntie's a nurse, Auntie Deb. She's been a nurse. She's now a practice nurse in a GP clinic. It's always been something that's always been a big passion, a big part of my family's life, and it's part of the reason that I also entered the health workforce space and continue to work in that health workforce space as well.
So brothers and sisters, have you got any brothers and sisters?
I do. I have a young sister, Grace. She's in her early 20s, studying up at James Cook University in Cairns, and she's a dental student. So she always wanted to enter the health space in some capacity, and dentistry and oral health was always of interest to her, and she decided to go down that path. I love my sister to death, Grace. We, like every pair of siblings, have our differences in opinion, as I'm sure many of your viewers would recognise. But Grace, she's a strong, capable, powerful Indigenous woman. She's capable of changing the world. I've said this multiple times, and she'll go on to do great things, not just in the oral health and dentistry space, but in the health space and Indigenous community more broadly. I'm sure of it.
Okay. So you talked about going to school over in Umino. So
yes.
What was like going to school in Umino?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the greatest things is the primary school's proximity to the beach. There's there's sand in the playground there. You can see it on the roadside when you're walking into the school. Its proximity to the beach and its proximity to other parts of the peninsula was always great. We lived just around the corner when I was going there initially, so that was always great. And also, the teachers there were fantastic. I started off in Kinder Pink with Miss McKenna.
Okay.
And I'll never forget my first day. Sometimes kids are sad, sometimes kids are happy to be there. I was a little bit sad to go in through the gates, but they made me feel welcome and they made me feel at home, and they gave me a good foundation for not just from an education standpoint, but from a community standpoint as well. I mean, the peninsula is a huge area, tens of thousands of people. Yamina Beach Public School is one of the biggest schools that we have here on the peninsula, if not the entire Central Coast. And that community grounding that it gives you, it's really quite something, and I'll always be proud to be a Yamina boy.
So I'm guessing you became a doctor. Was school easy for you?
No, school wasn't always easy for me, and I'll always be thankful for my teachers for helping me through school. Whether that's at Yamina Beach or over at Central Coast Grammar School, I had great support across multiple different subject disciplines, not just in the science and the typical health space subjects, but for example, at Central Coast Grammar School, across the areas of maths, science, Indonesian, so foreign languages, the social sciences, so economics and history. I've always had great support and great role models in teaching. They've given me a great educational foundation, and they've allowed me to really broaden my horizons in that aspect. So I'll always be grateful for the time and effort that they put in, and also to my mum and dad. I think one of the greatest things about schooling and education is it's a team effort. And I was extremely fortunate to have my parents alongside me, making sure that I was achieving my best and making sure that I realised my potential, and I'll be forever grateful for them as well.
Yeah. You did talk about grammar. Going from Yamina over to grammar would have been a big change, I'm going to guess, in demographics and whatnot. But how did you find the two schools?
Well, I think the biggest change was the drive. So grammar's about a 30-minute drive from here, whether you go via Empire Bay Drive or whether you go the main round through Gosford. And it's just a different environment. It's in a different part of the Central Coast. There were people coming from all sorts of schools, coming from all sorts of regions to Central Coast Grammar, and it was a bit of a melting pot in that regard of people, and not that dissimilar to Yamina Beach Public. It was the peninsula's always been a melting pot of people from other areas, and I think too it's that Central Coast foundation that's the most important. Doesn't matter what school you go to, doesn't matter where you are. You're still a coastie, you're still part of the Central Coast, and you're still part of that Central Coast family, which I talk about a lot. Whether it's in my publications or whether it's in my speeches, it's all about being part of that Central Coast family. So wherever you are here, it's just what I've believed in that regard.
So going through your childhood down here and whatnot, while we're in an idyllic world, what was something which was a struggle for you and you had to overcome?
Yeah, so I think one of the, I suppose we can go back to education as well. I've always found it, I did always find it a little bit difficult to, with reading and comprehension, and making sure I was able to, to comprehend what was on the page, and then turn that into an essay or something constructive. And also with numeracy and mathematics, I always found it a little bit difficult. But again, with the help of good teachers, both in the public and the independent sector, with the help of my parents, and with the help of family members, I was able to overcome those hurdles. Which led me to the career that I have today, not just in the Parliament, but also as a medical doctor as well. That's one of the big hurdles that I've had to overcome. That education challenge, and thus the importance of access to education, and thus the importance of access to good quality teachers.
Great teachers make the difference.
Great teachers do make the difference, because they're not just teachers. They're not just teaching you about what's on the board. They're not just teaching you what's in the book. They're teaching you what's on the board and what's in the book. How is that practically applied to life? and how will you be able to use that in a discipline that you find interesting? You use things, you use history, you use economics, you use science. I use them every day in Parliament, and it's only been beneficial for myself and our community. So you're right, good teachers make the difference.
And then being able to find that point how to engage with you. Every kid needs to engage differently with their teacher.
They do.
And finding that strong teacher and that influence can change everything.
Exactly, and they're a mentor at that stage as well, I think. And I'd actually like to thank a teacher who has recently come into my life, Liesl Tesh, as we all know, the member for Gosford. She mentored me and taught me everything that I need to know about being a local member, about engaging with my community. She was a mentor through the election process and through the campaign, and she still continues to be a mentor through my time now as the federal member for Roberson. And again, I'll be forever grateful for the help that she's provided me and continues to provide me into the future.
So usually we only really focus on the primary school and the secondary, but you've gone so much further with your education to become the doctor. So where did you go and do your degree?
Yep. So I was fortunate enough to study medicine at the University of Newcastle. So the way the program was broken up when I was doing it, it was a 5-year degree. The first 2 years are more theoretical based, so you're in lecture halls, but one of the good aspects of Newcastle University is that you're doing practical assessments, and you're doing those in-hospital pracs quite early on. I remember being in a hospital in Newcastle, taking patient histories in my first term doing medicine. So Newcastle's all about that practical experience. The third year is broken up and looks primarily at general practice. It looks about intersectional health, health with those more marginalised parts of our community, and then looking at health equity as a whole. And then in your 4th and 5th year, you move into the surgical specialties, the medical specialties, and then finally, and what was of interest to me, the critical care specialties. So looking at anaesthetics, intensive care, and emergency. So I did my first 3 years in Newcastle, and then I was fortunate, like I said earlier, to go back and do my 4th and 5th year in Gosford and Wyong hospitals. And then I put my hand up and said I'd like to do my internship here and do my residency here, and I was fortunate enough to be afforded that opportunity. I did my first rotation as an intern was with the urology service at Gosford Hospital. And that taught me some skills that I'll always use in my current medical practice. And then also in that first year as an intern, I did an emergency department rotation at Wyong Hospital. And I still remember the first patient that I saw and the doctor that I presented the case to afterwards. And it was pretty much after that where I thought, well, I think this is what I like. This is my area. This is where I need to be. And that's how it's always been. I did my internship, my residency, my senior residency, and so on. And the clinical teaching that you receive on the Central Coast is second to none. It's not just about going and doing professional development training in a lecture hall or a little classroom. You get the specialists at the bedside teaching you clinical findings and how that relates to the theory and vice versa. Yeah. Which a lot of other hospitals don't get.
So having that new facility there and linked with Newcastle University right next to Gosford Hospital just must change that whole experience. You're right there in the heart the whole way through your degree.
Yeah, so when I was there for 4th and 5th year, that big new building that you see was in the basement. So it's always been a teaching hospital for Newcastle University, and some of the other universities have teaching and practicals and placements there for the allied health disciplines and the like, but it's always been a teaching hospital for Newcastle University. But that new facility, you're right, is second to none. And I've had a bit of a walkthrough with faculty members from Newcastle University and from the health district, and it's fantastic. There's the state-of-the-art anatomy labs, and they've got simulation wards, which is excellent. They did have them in the basement of the hospital initially. Now they're in that. They're spread out on a floor of the building there, and it's open to medical students and nursing students. who can study and work collaboratively, it's fantastic. That teaching environment and that clinical teaching environment is so important for when you go and see patients in real life. It's very different from opening up a textbook and reading what a disease is and how to treat it, as opposed to actually going to the bedside and doing that. So Newcastle University and the Health District have formed a fantastic partnership there that is only going to be beneficial, not just for the students, but for the community as a whole.
Okay. We've spoken about a low and having to overcome that. What was your highest high? What's the one thing you remember from your childhood? You just think, this was just amazing?
Right. I've been fortunate to have had long, loving relationships with my grandparents, both Elaine and Auntie Robin, and my grandfather Ron. I've got a great relationship with my parents, my mum and my dad, and they've always been so supportive of me. My sister, as I've spoken about, we've always got on, and as siblings do. And my beautiful partner Shaylee, meeting her, I think we met quite early on in the piece, and we've been together for quite some time. But getting to know her and building a relationship with such a loving and caring person in the area that she works in is fantastic. So I don't think there isn't any one particular moment that's a standout. It's been a continuum and a spectrum of things that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of.
So is Shaylee from the coast as well?
She is. So Shaylee is a speech pathologist who works on the Central Coast. She's originally from Tumby, so the northern end, the southern northern end, I think. But yeah, like I said, we've been together for quite some time, and now in my new role, speaking about the NDIS and disability access is something that we talk about frequently, because she's very passionate. She treats children and paediatric cases who have profound disability and who really need significant access and supports and services. And she also does a lot of work with schools, screening children, seeing at what level they are and what supports and services they might require. So her impact in the community is far-reaching and broad, because it's not just health, it's education as well, and the intersection of both, and where disability links in there too. So the work that she does for our Central Coast family is unparalleled.
Yeah, it's always nice when your partner comes from the same area. My wife's from the same area, from the Central Coast as well. And
Yep.
And you all just understand how it all works and how it feels. So
exactly, yeah, you get that, not just from the healthcare side of things, but you're right. If we're from the same area, we've grown up in the same area from when we were little. We've been to school in the same area. We were educated at the same university, and now we work in the same area. You're right. You know how the place ticks.
Yeah,
which is important.
And you've always got something to talk about. You can talk about the old days, or do you remember when?
Yep.
And
or where we're going.
Yeah.
Or where we're going.
You've moved from being a medical practitioner into being the MP for Roberson. So how did that change happen, and how have you felt that change happen?
Yeah, of course. So I suppose just to start, I still practice as a doctor on a pro bono basis in the emergency department. But I'll give you the not so short version of why I got into politics, because most people wonder, why did you go from the most trusted profession into one of the least trusted professions? I suppose one of the things that I consider is when I'm working as a doctor or practicing medicine, my impact can help one patient or can help one family, whereas in my new role, as part of a government, or as part of the parliament, I should say, our reach and our effect and our impact is felt by thousands, if not millions of people. We've passed legislation recently like the Cheaper Medicines Act to lower the price of medications, which impacts thousands of people on the Central Coast and millions of people across the country. And that's sort of part of the reason I made the jump to become a parliamentarian. And I give a story of a shift that I had at one of our hospitals here on the Central Coast. And it was in the emergency department. It was between two of the outbreaks, two of the COVID outbreaks that were occurring, two of the peaks. So we were still seeing people come in with COVID, and we were all still in PPE, and COVID patients were still coming through the door. But we were also seeing a significant amount of patients coming because they were fleeing family and domestic violence. They couldn't afford to get into social or affordable housing, or they were still waiting for social and affordable housing, or they couldn't get into emergency or crisis care. People couldn't afford food, they couldn't afford their medicines. With medicines, they're rationing it every second or third day, meaning that chronically controlled conditions like high blood pressure or high cholesterol were becoming heart attacks and strokes. People couldn't afford their blood thinners, so they were developing clots or strokes. So there was that. People couldn't afford to see their GP or couldn't get access to their GP in a timely fashion. And I think I was having shifts like that repeatedly over and over again, and the way I thought of it was you could either complain about it or you can try and do something about it. And I'm under no illusions that I can change. You can't change the world overnight, and you're not going to be able to fix every problem, but you can give it a red hot crack.
But it's important to have a voice who understands that.
To have a voice, and sometimes and often the Central Coast is the poor cousin of the east coast of New South Wales. I've lived here and grown up here and know that. You've lived here and grown up and known that. That's to me, that's always been the case. And I thought, well, I can be loud and annoy people on people's behalf. That's why I'm here. It's all about advocating. Medicine's about advocating for your patient, and this role is about advocating for your community. And I think that I know that the skills and the knowledge that I've developed by living here and by practicing medicine, I could adapt and apply into parliamentary life. And so I volunteered. I put my hand up to run as Labor candidate for the seat of Roberson, and that began the election campaign for the last federal election, which we all remember. And I had a great team behind me.
So Labor, a lot of people would probably think that a doctor running for Labor would be a contradiction. Most doctors would be on the Liberal side. Why Labor? What's important about Labor?
I think, and obviously everyone's entitled to their own political view and their affiliation with their own political party. I suppose I've always been of the opinion that you need to be socially progressive, whether that's in healthcare, whether that's in climate, whether that's in energy, but you need to be fiscally responsible about it. So you can have these ideas and you can have these forward-thinking, progressive ideas, but you need the ability to pay for it. And like I said, education, climate, energy, education, healthcare, all of that, you need a way to pay for it. And that's what Labor is. Labor's the party of big things. We're the party that does things. You look at the NDIS, you look at Medicare, you look at what we're doing now with the Affordable Medicines Act. We've put legislation through for the National Reconstruction Fund to make Australia a country that makes things again like we used to be. The safeguard mechanism and the Powering Australia plan, acting on climate change, enshrining things into law so that we act on that. Labor's always been the party that does things like that, progressing a referendum for the voice, the Aboriginal voice to Parliament. We've always been that party that's driven Australia forward, and we've brought everyone with us, regardless of whether you vote Labor, Greens, Liberal, National, whatever it might be. If you voted for us, thank you for your support, and we'll bring you along. If you didn't vote for us, we hope that we'll win your support in the next round, but we'll bring you with us too, because that's what Labor's about. It's about everyone. It's about the whole community.
So in 2021, you spoke about affordable housing being one of the biggest crises we have, particularly here on the Central Coast. Mm-hmm. So what have you been doing in Parliament to try and fix that?
Absolutely. So I'd first like to acknowledge that housing is a real housing supply, housing affordability, and access to housing is a huge issue right across the country, but also here on the Central Coast. It's never been more expensive to own a home. It's never been more expensive to maintain a home and to access a home. One of the things that the Albanese Labor government took to the election was the Housing Australia Future Fund. And what that involved was an off-budget investment into the Future Fund of Australia, and then the return on that investment would then fund the construction, particularly of social and affordable housing. And then part of that would be earmarked for at-risk groups. So women and children fleeing domestic violence, Indigenous people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, veterans who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, and the fastest growing group of homeless people in Australia, women over the age of 50 in low income brackets. So that's the basics of what that looked at, along with the repair and construction of emergency accommodation and crisis accommodation. That bill, under Minister Julie Collins, the Minister for Housing and Homelessness and Small Business, passed through the House of Representatives, and it's now in the Senate undergoing negotiations. And what I would say to my colleagues right across the Parliament is that this policy, the Housing Australia Future Fund, is supported throughout the business community. It's supported throughout the community. The people of Australia voted for this policy. This was a policy we took to the election and that we have a mandate for. And it's so important that we act on housing now. I don't need to tell you, we're in crisis mode with housing.
We're in crisis mode.
So this will be an important first step. It's one of the nation's largest investments into social and affordable housing. It's making sure that, we have that infrastructure there for the future, so that it can continue to be used by our community. So, and when you have stable housing, whether it be social, whether it be affordable, whether it be private, if you have stable housing, there's only beneficial flow-on effects from there. If you've got a roof over your head, we know from the data that you're more likely to hold down a job, and you're more likely to be able to access services and the like. So I think it's really important that we focus on housing. It's a big focus of mine. It's a big focus of members of the community here. Clearly a big focus of yours. And
very big focus.
I'd like to see it passed.
So on the coast, you definitely hear an undertone of people saying, if we stop people coming here, we won't have the housing crisis here. Is that something you see, that stopping people coming would stop a housing crisis, or is there a fundamental issue across the board?
So look, I think what makes the coast and what makes the peninsula a great place to grow up, a great place to live, is the diversity and the vibrancy in the community. People coming from all corners of not just Australia, but all corners of the globe to call the peninsula and to call the Central Coast their home is what has made this place a great place to grow up, a great place to be educated, a great place to stay and to live and to learn. Yeah. I think where we need to focus is on the construction and the investment in the infrastructure that's going to benefit the community as a whole. Like we've just spoken about the Housing Australia Future Fund. It's making sure we're investing in social and affordable housing. We were able to secure in the budget multiple investments for roads. So that's both local roads and state roads, to widen Avoca Drive, to upgrade Avoca Drive, to repair and renew some of our local roads, upgrade our local sporting facilities like the one at Frost Reserve in Kingcumber. I think we need, as our population grows here on the Central Coast, we need to make sure that the infrastructure keeps pace and the infrastructure grows. Yeah. Also with the addition of the urgent care centre. So if you're too sick for the GP, not sick enough for the emergency department, normally you don't have anywhere to go. Lots of other countries have that model of care. I'm going to nerd out as a doctor for a minute. Normally don't have anywhere to go. Places like New Zealand, places like the UK have that middle level care. So I'm talking the fracture of the arm at Saturday or Sunday sport that needs a plaster but doesn't need surgery. This would be somewhere you'd go. Or a cut that you need stitches for. That'd be somewhere you'd go. Dobell, the electorate in the north, and Roberson here, we're getting 2 on the Central Coast. The tender process has already gone out. To start that process. Mark Butler, the Health Minister, was here just recently to get that up and running. It'll be a bulk build clinic for adults and children with extended operating hours designed to take pressure off our GPs and our emergency departments. Yeah. So it's not just about focusing on one type of infrastructure to cope with our increasing population. It's making sure that we're not siloing and we're broadening what we're looking at. Healthcare, roads, housing, sporting facilities, recreation facilities and the like. And making sure too that we're working together with all tiers of government. That's really important for an area like the coast. So making sure we're working well with the Central Coast Administration, making sure that we're working with our state members of all political persuasions and also our federal members as well, because that's what Team Central Coast is all about.
Yeah. So one of the other things which I see, my grandmother lived in Booker Bay just down the road here.
Yep.
And that whole suburb's changed and it's all Airbnbs nowadays. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the housing stock is now taken up through that holiday Airbnb style of housing. And the peninsula is a big place for that. Is there some way we can sort of manage that, not overtaking and taking out a pure residence just for a holiday house?
Well, and I think this goes back to the original point that I was making about investing in social affordable housing. and making sure that we have that infrastructure there right across the country with the Housing Australia Future Fund. And it's also then working with our state colleagues, so the likes of Liesl Tesh and Adam Crouch and David Harris, David Meehan and Yasmin Catley, and Emma McBride, my federal counterpart to the north, and Pat Conroy, who's the bottom third of his electorates on the Central Coast. It's making sure that we're all working together to make sure that people can get access to a home and can get access to a roof over their heads. So that's a complex issue, and the reason that the Housing Australia Future Fund is so important.
All right. Team Central Coast, it's one of your hashtags which you run a lot, and you just ran through a big long list of people which you're all working together. Well, what is that trying to achieve, and is it seeing the results? Because I believe it is, but what's your view?
So I always talk about our Central Coast family and Team Central Coast. And the reason that I do that is I think over a period of time, we've lost that sense of community and that sense of togetherness, and COVID really exacerbated that problem. We were isolated, we were locked down for important reasons, but what we did lose is that sense of whole and that sense of we're one big family, we're all in this together, we are one Central Coast, and we need to go to Canberra, we need to go to Macquarie Street as one Central Coast, because that's how we achieve the outcomes for our people. So when I say lines on social media like Happy Friday Team Central Coast, or when I'm writing cards or letters to people thanking them for the work that they do for our Central Coast family, I'm trying to instill that sense of togetherness, that sense of community. And I think in my position, the privileged position that I have as a community leader, as an elected representative, is to try and foster that and to try and nurture that and hopefully see it spread throughout our region. Because we are stronger when we're together, where you need to be the sum of many parts to get something done. You can't be fractured and fragmented.
I agree wholeheartedly. We're going to change angle a little bit here and talk about the voice to Parliament. I feel it's a very strong topic at the moment, and with the introduction of the legislation recently, it's really started to drive home that we're going to have this discussion and debate. What's your opinion on the voice to Parliament, and what's your view of what it'll be?
Yeah, of course. So you're absolutely right. There was a piece of legislation that was introduced to the Parliament in the last sitting week by the Attorney-General, Mark Dreyfus, and it was the Constitutional Alteration Bill. And what that is basically is the wording of what will be on the ballot paper when people vote towards the end of this year. And it's about two things. It's about acknowledgement and it's about consultation. So it's about acknowledging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first peoples of Australia. They are the longest, and we are the longest continuing culture on earth, over 65,000 years of connection to country, connection to culture, and connection to people.
And something all Australians need to be proud of.
Absolutely.
65,000 years.
Absolutely. It's something we should all be proud of. That is a unifying statement, that is a unifying belief in itself. Because it's acknowledging history and it's acknowledging who we are. And then the second part of the question, which is combined, is the establishment of an Aboriginal and a Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament. And what that includes is an independent body being able to make representations to government on the issues that will affect Indigenous people. So basically what that means is a body that is independent to government, made up of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. They will be able to have a say on the issues that will affect them. So it doesn't matter what that issue is. If it affects Aboriginal people, they can provide the advice to government. It won't have a veto power. It's not a third chamber. It doesn't have a service delivery model like some of the commentators have said. It's an independent body, and I think there's a few things in that which I just want to get across. If that's okay. On indulgence. One of the things is we have one of the highest numbers of elected First Nations MPs and senators that we've ever had in the history of the country. And that's fantastic. And that's not just on our side of politics, that's right across the political spectrum. Greens, Independents, Labor, all of it, Nationals as well. That's really, really important that we have that representation. But I may not be here forever, okay? The senators may not be here forever. In this recent election, we had those people elected, we had us elected. In the next one, we may not. What constitutionally enshrining a voice will do is making sure that that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament is always there and is always there into the future. That's really important. And a lot of people also talk about bureaucracy and will it be another layer of bureaucracy in our government? And the answer to that question is a resounding no, it won't. And the reason that it won't be is that a government department is there to prosecute the policies of the government of the day, Liberal, Labor, whatever. It's their job to get that policy across the line and to provide fearless and frank advice to the government of the day to get what the people voted for across the line. Whereas the voice is different in that it's made up of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and regardless of what the government policy is, and regardless of who is in government, they will then be providing advice onto how that policy that is going to be put before the Parliament is going to affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And that is the most important thing. It's not about trying to get that policy across the line. It's not about adapting that policy to make it work. It's about an independent voice saying, these bits are good, these bits are bad, here's the advice.
And then it goes into Parliament, passes, and then it goes to the bureaucracy.
Yeah, and I should say as well, the voice doesn't have a veto power. So they can't just say, can't do that, sorry. That's not how it works. It's providing advice to government. Then it's up to government to listen, which is important.
Yeah. So with that discussion going on, here on the Central Coast, we've been without a council for quite some time. Yeah. But in 2024, it's going to be reinstated.
Yes.
Is it something that while we're doing that restructure, we potentially should be looking at is how do we integrate the local people's culture, be that place names, etc., but also a voice into council to try and help with Dugajung country? Yeah,
sure. So I think so. There's a few things in that. So you're right. We won't have an elected council until next year, in September next year, I believe. So there is some time between now and then. I know that a lot of the correspondence I receive from constituents primarily centres around local government. People come to me as their elected representative. I'll never turn them away if it's a local or a state issue. Doesn't matter if it's local, state or federal, I've become a one-stop shop in that regard. And I'm more than happy to listen to the concerns of constituents, no matter what it is. But, it will be important in the coming years to have that elected council back and to make sure that that's restored. That's important. And we've been very supportive of states and local governments of implementing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice or representation or whatever that might be within local and state government structures. We saw in South Australia just recently a legislated voice that was completed there. And I'd encourage your listeners and your viewers to definitely have a look at that and to see that an Aboriginal and a Torres Strait Islander voice is so important to Parliament, and it means a lot to the Aboriginal community that we can have a say in those decisions.
Your two professions are two professions very few people ever get involved with, that they briefly pass through your environment.
Yep.
So what's a normal day for a GP versus an MP?
Right. So I'll quickly go on record and say I'm not a GP. I'm an emergency department doctor. GPs, they're very different clinical environments. So I think we'll start off with how they're similar. They're obviously different for the major reasons that, one's a governance role, one's a clinical role. One is looking at a patient and the patient's history, doing a physical exam, undertaking those investigations, blood tests and scans, identifying that problem and then trying to fix that problem, and then either sending them home or admitting them to hospital or sending them to another centre for further care. Politics and being a parliamentarian isn't that different to that process. A constituent will come to me with a local, state or federal issue, doesn't matter what it is. They'll come to me with that issue, and there is the expectation that I will then either fix that issue on the spot, or then I can find or triage where that issue needs to go to try and get the best outcome for that constituent. So it's all about identifying the problem, finding a solution to that problem, and then finding an outcome that we're able to achieve for the person, the patient or the constituent. So they're quite similar in that regard. I suppose there's a little bit less blood and guts in Parliament. It does get a bit heated from time to time in the chamber, but overall they are very different, but they're also very similar in that you've got an issue and you've got to find an outcome or a solution to that issue. And if I can just quickly take a moment to thank the people that I still practice with, the nurses and the doctors, allied health and the ancillary staff for all the hard work they do here on the coast. They do so much good for our community and they work tirelessly. They are working day and night to make sure people can go home to their loved ones. And I'll thank them every day for the work that they do.
Excellent, thank you. So part of the channel is Australia asking questions of the interviewee. Yep. So they hop on our socials and put the questions they actually want to ask. And we've got a question from Seal in Narara. Why are nurses so stretched today compared to 15 years ago? Mm-hmm. They seem to be just running everywhere and doing everything and just so many patients in their wards.
Yep.
What's changed?
I think that's a huge question, and thank you for the question as well. I think one of the main reasons is multifactorial. So you've got, from a workforce side, you've got people leaving the profession in higher numbers than they ever have, for multiple different reasons, including burnout. So there's that issue that there's now less nurses, less health professionals on the floor. And I'm just going to speak for New South Wales just for a moment. Less nurses on the floor. So that immediately presents a problem because you've got less workforce and the same, if not more, patients coming through the doors. You've then got a population where they're a lot more medically complex. They're on more medications. They've got more medical comorbidities. It's not just someone with high blood pressure or high cholesterol anymore. It's someone that's had 3 heart attacks. They've got multiple stents. They've had a stroke. They've got diabetes. They've got kidney failure. They're very, very medically complex. And medically complex patients do require more care, they require more time, and they require more input just by the nature of the diseases that they're presenting with and the medical issues that they present with as well.
Is that why the nurses are pushing for ratios? They believe that if they have fixed ratios that could be fixed?
Yeah, so I suppose and this was one of the great things that the now Minns Labor government took to the very recent state election was moving to safe staffing levels. So in particular, 1 to 3 in ED. So that means 1 nurse to 3 patients. That hasn't been the case in the past. And if we move towards that, you're going to see patients who are monitored more frequently. We're going to be able to recognise the deteriorating patient faster and also provide optimum levels of care. And that's been shown in other states. That's why the Nursing and Midwifery Association were pushing for that. That's why the Minns Labor government have moved towards the safe staffing levels, and they took that to the election. And it's a big issue here on the coast. So I think it's very multifactorial. We've got that from the state government. We're doing our TAFE and university policies for areas of need and national priority, including healthcare. So that's 500,000 fee-free TAFE positions, 22,000 additional Commonwealth-supported university positions for areas of need and national priority. It's looking at ways that we can reduce student debt for healthcare professionals in rural and remote settings. There's trials down in Tasmania about general practice. There's the urgent care centres I was talking about. It's part of the whole suite of policies that now the federal government and the state government will work together to make sure we're taking pressure off our hospitals, including our nurses.
Peter from Flynn asks, is the COVID epidemic over? Or why did we stop wearing masks? Is it done with or not?
No, thank you, Peter, for your question. No, it's not. COVID is not finished and it is not over. And I'll take a moment to say that if you are unable to safely socially distance and if you're unwell, 1, stay home, get tested, and 2, wear a mask, ensure you wash your hands and keep up to date with your vaccinations. It's not over. We still see patients presenting with COVID-19. We do see there has been a reduction in the amount of patients presenting with severe disease and who are dying from COVID because of our high levels of vaccination. But I would highly recommend that that the wider community do keep up with their COVID-19 vaccines in consultation with their general practitioner who know their medical history better than anyone because it does save lives. It saves lives every day, and not just COVID. I look at the influenza vaccine as well. Also important to make sure that you're keeping up to date with that, again, on advice from your general practitioner and your healthcare professional, because we know that it's not just COVID, there's also influenza and the like that are also quite dangerous. Those respiratory pathogens can be quite dangerous, particularly too if you're immunocompromised, so if your immune system isn't quite as strong as it should be, or if you're in the elderly population. So it's important that you take that advice from your doctor, but keep up to date with your vaccines, wash your hands and wear a mask.
Okay. Carol from Kipper, his question was, Bob Hawke said that no child should live in poverty, yet still 1 in 6 are. What's Labor trying to do to fix that problem?
So I think it's about access. One of the big ways that we can lift people out of poverty is access to healthcare, access to education, access to food and essential services, and access to clean water. We've known how to lift people out of poverty for quite some time. We just need to put the time and the effort and the funds into it. That's the importance of the Housing Australia Future Fund and investing in social and affordable housing. That's the investment in the cheaper medicines. That's the investment in the urgent care centres and the Medicare Strengthening Fund to strengthen primary care. That's the investment into TAFE. That's the investment into university. It's again not an issue that you can silo into one thing. It's something that you need to look at more broadly across the economy, across the sector, across the community. And again, it's coming together as one and making sure that we're taking the issues of the Central Coast, which this is one of, to Canberra and to Macquarie Street and to the administration, and making sure that our voices are heard in that regard. And this will be an important factor with the voice as well, because there are many policies and there are many issues within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community that currently don't have a voice and don't have a seat at the table at the moment, and this is what the voice will provide.
Thank you. So Shane from the Gosford Anglican Justice Ministry has asked a question. The Greens just put forward a bill to evacuate the people on Nauru and the Pacific Islands which needed medical help and whatnot, but it didn't make its way through. That they believe that it was well worded for Labor, but it just didn't make it through. What do we think we can do to try and finalise that issue?
Yeah. Was that from Shane? No, thank you for the question, Shane. Look, I think one of the biggest roles that I see myself having is getting your issues in front of the minister. I see myself as almost a bit of a liaison service. It's my job to annoy people on your behalf. Again, local, state or federal issues. This obviously being a federal issue about offshore detention and issues surrounding offshore detention. And what I would do, I would encourage Shane, and I'm sure you can pass on my details to Shane, to write to me, and I will then make sure that his question and his concerns are put before the minister. That's definitely my job. But the health and well-being of Australians is something that I take very seriously. I always have taken it seriously. I still take it seriously, and I think that's really important. So I'd ask Shane to please write to me. I'll pick up the phone, I'll have a chat with you, and we can go from there.
Excellent. So Alex from Narara, she's asked, there's rumours that they're going to shut down Gosford TAFE. We were talking about how beneficial it is now having Arimba University and the doctors and nurses buildings in Gosford Hospital. Losing a TAFE on the coast would be devastating for our education. Yep. What can we do to try and continue to build education on the coast? Because that is one of the things which really lifts a populace, is education. So what can we keep doing to try and...
And was Alex, was it?
Alex.
Yeah, no, and thank you for the question, Alex. TAFE is one of our most important educational institutions, and it has been. And it's not just a stepping stone to university, or it's not just a stepping stone to something else. It's an educational institution that has led to the prosperity of millions of Australians for a long period of time. And not just in the trades, in IT, graphic design, you name it. It's been a central part of our community here on the coast in particular. That's why, I'll go from a federal perspective for just a moment, we committed to 500,000 fee-free TAFE positions, including our new energy apprenticeships, some of which are the usual apprenticeships, but they're going to be highly needed and highly sought after when we move through our energy transition to include renewable energies into that energy mix. So TAFE's always been a vital and important part of that. TAFE had the belly ripped out of it by the former Liberal National Government in New South Wales. It really did. There's no two ways of putting that. And it's been sad to see. It's definitely been sad to see, and I'm glad now that the Minns Labor government, together with our Labor team here on the Central Coast, have really put TAFE and tertiary education as a priority, as a priority for our region forward to those more executive levels of government. And this is something that I definitely will be having discussions with the new Minister for the Central Coast, David Harris, about, and also the new Minister for TAFE as well. I think it's important that we make sure that our voice is heard with regards to TAFE and tertiary education here on the Central Coast at those highest levels.
Yeah, for me personally, it was a game changer for me. Learning through TAFE was the way I learned to learn.
Yeah, exactly.
My schooling was, me and school didn't really go together very well, but TAFE was where I learned to learn and gave me everything. So yeah,
learn to learn, and also too, from what other people say, it's very practical, it's very hands-on, and you learn how to do the skill, you learn how to do the trade, you learn how to do the profession better than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to the future, we've spoken a lot about your past and the current things which we've all been working on. But let's look at the future. What's the future look like for you personally?
What's the future look like for me personally?
Yeah.
I think, like I said before, that sense of community and that sense of family is probably the most important thing for me in this job at the moment, but into the future as well. While I'm a parliamentarian and long after I'm gone, significantly after I'm gone, I do want to see our region and our Central Coast be a tight-knit community and a tight-knit family. It is that, but I want to see it tighter. We work so much better when we're together, and I want to make sure that continues into the future, because, you know, when we lobby as a team, we're stronger. We're stronger, and you're only going to see benefits from that in our infrastructure, in our health access, care for our aged care sectors, our disability and NDIS sectors. I want to see us come together.
So the Central Coast is the 9th largest populace in Australia at the moment. Where do you see that growing over the next 20 years? Long term, where do you see it sort of progressing? Are we going to stay in our little villages, or are we going to become a large metropolis? Where do you see us sort of going?
I think it's probably a mixture of both. I mean, we've got people that are moving to the Central Coast from Sydney and from Newcastle, from Wollongong, particularly after COVID. People want that sea change. They want that tree change. They want to be able to see like that. They want that. They want to see Lion Island, and I think that's fantastic. That's only gonna benefit our local area. We just have to make sure the infrastructure keeps pace. Health, roads, everything I've spoken about. I won't go on again, but everything that I've spoken about. I do believe the Central Coast will always have that local village feel. It will always have that local community feel. That tight knit team that we've always been. And you know, we're an accepting bunch. You know, when people come here, we welcome them with open arms. I always have. A lot of my friends have, family have, community have, and I think we should continue that because we're only made stronger and richer by our diversity. Whether that's people coming from overseas, from all corners of the globe, whether that's people coming from the cities, whether that's people coming from the other side of the country, from Perth to Adelaide to Darwin, doesn't matter where you're from. I see us as a family, a growing family, but a family that will continue on into the future.
Let's broaden out a bit. Look at Australia. Where do you see Australia being in 50 years? After 65,000 years, getting to where we are, where do you see us going for that next 50 years? And what would you go, tick, we've been successful? What's that tick for you?
Well, I think a unified country. A unified country. To look in the near term, the referendum that's coming up on the voice, that'll be a unifying moment for our country. And I support a yes vote for the referendum. I'm very much in favour for a voice to Parliament and acknowledgement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But I do see in the future, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, 300 years from now, I see a unified country. I see a country that has embraced its natural resources, including the sun, including the wind. I see a country that embraces its diversity, whether that be First Nations communities, whether that be our multicultural communities, I see us embracing that, embracing those cultures, and I see us coming together. I see us as a powerhouse in our part of the world. We're in the Pacific, we're in Asia, we're also significantly tied in with Europe, the United States, and Northern America. I see us as being a powerhouse in the world, and I believe that we'll get there.
I hope we get there.
We absolutely
and,
will.
Thank you very much for coming today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. If you ever want to come back, we'd love to have you back, but thank you very much.
Thanks, mate.
Absolute
Appreciate
pleasure.
it. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. Please like and subscribe on YouTube and follow us on all our socials. It helps us immensely.